When The Mandalorian was first revealed, my impressions of it were piss poor. This was the first live-action Star Wars show, and I was underwhelmed. I saw this guy and was like, oh, Boba Fett wannabe. They might as well have brought Boba Fett back. This guy's going to be a cheap cop-out of a cheap cop-out. Skip! I also didn't like the look of this show. I mean, what else is new? Disney doesn't understand Star Wars. Of course they were going to get the look wrong. It was closer to Mad Max than anything resembling Star Wars, or even the Disney stuff up until that point. So I had no interest to see The Mandalorian. Disney Plus could go screw itself. Disney tried to pull a trick I wasn't falling for. Stick to Netflix. But then I start hearing how the show is actually really good, and that piqued my curiosity. Could we finally have a gem amongst the garbage aside from Fallen Order? Could this universally loved show be the saving grace to all those years of bullshit Disney have given us, whether it be the sequels, the EA-made games, the forgettable books, and everything in between? Could this save Star Wars after The Last Jedi? My expectations for this show after hearing the reception was optimistic, but I didn't like the premise of it being about a Mandalorian character that looks like Boba Fett, with all that armor set after Return of the Jedi. The setting makes it look like the Empire was actually right, and the galaxy was better off with the Empire in control rather than the Rebellion. But even an uninteresting idea can be executed well, so let's talk about it and find out if it was. This is an episodic TV show, so this review may be long. Not too long, I hope. It is 8 episodes, which sounds really short. I was expecting at least 12, but maybe it's a case of quality over quantity. Let's talk about what's going on. The story is set several years after Return of the Jedi. The New Republic is the dominant power now, although we don't see them much. I was kind of confused on the state of the galaxy post-Return of the Jedi in this show. Hearing about how the Imperial Remnant were defeated at Jakku, I was confused to see why there were Imperial Remnants. Why hasn't the Rebellion gotten rid of them already? At the start, it feels like The Mandalorian is setting up its own timeline post-Return of the Jedi. Maybe that's why many suggested this would undo the sequel trilogy. Because if I didn't know any better, I might say this is going to start a new canon or something. It feels really disconnected from the films, which isn't a bad thing. It can be standalone, but it doesn't feel like it exists with the films, or any Disney material up until that point at all. It feels like a post-apocalyptic reality where the Empire has crumbled and the galaxy is in chaos because of that, which feels like Palps was right all along, and the Empire kept the galaxy united and safe. Now I will admit I am an Imperial sympathizer of sorts. I like to see the Empire and the Rebellion and every faction at an objective lens because of the great themes of Revenge of the Sith, that morality is not so black and white, and the Imperials and Rebels can be very similar to each other in many different circumstances. At this point, I've taken this viewpoint to heart, and I try to see both sides of a story, and I really don't like it when the villains are just evil because they're evil. I've had douchebags label me a fascist because I had Imperial sympathies, because the Empire based off the Nazis or something, which I've argued time and time again. It doesn't matter what their inspirations are, the Empire exists in a completely different universe and must be judged on their own merits within their universe. And based on what we see in the original trilogy, I don't see why an Empire was so bad to live under. It's mostly seen through the lens of the Imperial military, which I mean, what they do is horrible, but war is a terrible thing and atrocities happen. Not to excuse the Empire for blowing up planets, but it's a reflection of real life. The US, for example, shouldn't be sending drones to bomb non-military targets, but they do. When I see that the Empire killed Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, I want to know if there was more to it. Remember, the Empire needed to get the Death Star plans back, and the droids were tracked to the Lars homestead. And both Owen and Beru had a son they could not account for. And also, the droids were suspiciously gone. So maybe it was a misunderstanding and the Empire killed them because they thought they were aiding the rebellion and put 2 and 2 together. But point is, I was watching The Mandalorian and was wondering why the hell the Empire is supposed to be the bad guys. They don't really do a lot of evil shit in the entire show. That's not to say that they don't do anything evil at all, it's just that there's not a lot of it. Well, for this review, I will be reviewing each episode individually, because remember, each episode had a different director and different qualities between episodes in terms of writing. So let's start with the pilot. The pilot is actually decent. People praise the pilot to the stars, and I didn't think it was bad, far from it. It just wasn't as good as people think. The main problem episode 1 has is that there's a surprising amount of filler. Now, a show doesn't need to have an essential intro. I recently learnt that a story can actually work if it sets up the tone. Raiders of the Lost Ark, for example, has a completely irrelevant start plot-wise, and it's considered a great movie. I'm really not trying to sound like a film buff, but I want to express something I learnt from studying a film closely. The Mandalorian starts with some ice planet, with the titular Mandalorian looking for a bounty. It's this blue amphibian dude who shows up in a later episode in season 2, which is a great Chekhov's gun moment when it happens, but he feels pretty pointless in the pilot. The start with the blue guy actually feels like a waste of time. He isn't used to set the tone of the show very well. And I'm seriously not trying to copy Anomaly Inc. He and I share a similar opinion on The Mandalorian, but I disagree with him on a few things. For example, he complained that the blue guy, as an alien, didn't have any sort of accent, sounding like your average American, and went on about how George Lucas gave aliens accents to differentiate them from the humans. I kind of feel this is nitpicking. Like, it could just be explained off with the blue guy being a fluent speaker of Galactic Basic. It could be anything, and I feel it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, they're probably giving him no accent to pander to people who complained about racial stereotypes, but it's hardly noticeable, and I didn't care one bit. The start does give us a taste of the Mandalorian's personality, as we see that he's a cold, silent type, and that he also has a disliking to droids, which we actually see in a flashback later in the episode, that he dislikes droid because they slaughtered his family during the Clone Wars, done entirely through visuals. But besides from that, the start is basically the Mandalorian getting annoyed by the blue guy and then freezing him in carbonite. Which Anomaly also complained that the carbonite freezing wouldn't be normalized yet, but like, maybe there's a safety in place to keep his bounties alive. Like additional life support to what Han Solo got. Because I doubt Mando would just use a risky material to potentially kill the blue guy. So point is, we get to the main plot. When Mando meets with Apollo Creed. Damn, this show is getting a little rocky. I have no idea why Carl Weathers was cast as Greef Karga, because it seems like a role people would joke about. Like, what I mean is that the actor was in another iconic franchise, and now he's in an even bigger franchise, and people like me are gonna make Apollo Creed jokes. Remember that stupid fan theory that Indiana Jones was just a dream Han Solo had in carbonite? Well, imagine if the same is true for Greef Karga, dreaming the entire Rocky series and waking up when Ivan Drago punches him in the head. That would be silly as hell, and I hope I didn't just inspire someone to theorize something so dumb like that. Greef Karga isn't a very interesting character, at least in this episode. He does become a little identifiable towards the end of the season, but other than that, I wondered who the hell he was. You see, I usually like watching things with subtitles on, so I can actually get a grasp of what a character said. I think Disney Star Wars has done a bad job of establishing characters' names. Not only are their costumes bland as shit, but they do a bad job of clearly setting up these characters' names in a memorable way. I can't believe they actually tried to sell toys based on this guy. They probably thought that the real Apollo Creed would sell merch, and I'd be honestly surprised if the Greef Karga toys actually sold a single cent from anyone other than collectors. Just have a look at this. You're better off getting someone from the gimmicky Bad Batch. Who the hell is going to buy anything based off the Mandalorian besides you-know-who? And what makes this sadder is that The Mandalorian is probably more marketable than anything in the sequel trilogy, but it's still not fucking good enough. But off with the rant. So Greef Karga tells Mando there's a contract from an unknown party that pays more than the crappy bounties that are hardly enough to cover travel expenses. And this is the contract that starts the main story. I really like the scene where Mando just walks in with the client using stormtroopers as bodyguards, and there's a lot of hassle between both parties. The client tells Mando that there's a target they want to bring back alive, a 50-year-old life form from a desert planet, not Tatooine. And as payment for completing the job, he will be paid Beskar armor, although the show doesn't establish the specifics. Now this is where I agree with Anomaly. The Mandalorian was not marketed as a sequel show to Star Wars Rebels or the Clone Wars, so it's important that it sets up the universe in play and necessary context and all that shit. Since I played Knights of the Old Republic, I know what the Mandalorians are. A culture of warriors, but someone who is only interested in the live action stuff, who decided not to watch the Clone Wars or Rebels, they are not going to know what the Mandalorians are exactly. This is the pilot. All the essentials need to be explained here, and given what happens at the start, a lot more time could have been used to establish the world. The Mandalorian, from what I notice, suffers from padding and filler. It has a crap ton of pointless scenes, which maybe it'll be fixed in Season 3, whenever the hell that is coming out. But for now, it's just padding and filler. So anyways, Mando gets some Beskar as a down payment. He gives it to the Armorer, a character with little relevance in the show, and only exists to sell toys even though all she does is forge armor. I know that doesn't sound so bad, but I was really uninterested in the scenes where they just forge Beskar armor, no matter how cool they tried to make it look on screen. So Mando sets out for the target. He goes to the Tatooine clone and meets a dude that looks like the people from Cloud City in Empire Strikes Back. This is a character that they also thought they could sell toys based off of. God damn it, I don't want to buy any of these fucking toys, god damn it. I'd rather buy a Star Trek toy for fuck's sake. Goddamn character designers and toy makers thinking they can make a dime off of these uninteresting characters. Bloody hell. So to pad the time out, we are given a scene of riding these animals as the Cloud City dude tells Mando he will help him. So with that being said, they travel across the planet to a holdout base where some criminals and mercenaries patrol the place. Mando goes in, meets up with a droid, IG-11, which, I mean, what was wrong with using IG-88? The character that this knockoff was based on. It'd be nice to use him for something other than the background for Empire Strikes Back. Well anyways, Mando and IG-11 decide to work together for this one sequence, in a pretty cool action sequence. They kill all the criminal and mercenary scum, and then they find the package. And anyone who knows even anything about the merch knows what it is. An infant Yoda. Yeah. IG-11 wants to terminate the child, but Mandalorian stops him in his tracks and destroys the IG-88 knockoff because he immediately grew compassion for the child. And that's the end of episode 1. With that being said, this episode was a decent start, which isn't exactly what I like from Star Wars. I keep on complaining that people have put their standards for good Star Wars low enough that they'll try to enjoy anything Disney puts out, even if it's not worth it. I refuse to lower my standards from the Lucas era. If Lucas could do it, Disney, with all the money and resources more that they have, can do it also. My main praise of the episode are the action sequences and some really cool set pieces. Its production values are really good, but the writing is where the episode falters a lot. Questionable pacing, lack of sufficient world building, and slightly disappointing character building. This episode gets a 7.5 out of 10. This episode half feels like a waste of time. I say half because the episode feels a lot like the story being stopped in its tracks for a pointless side quest. I may have said before that The Mandalorian feels like a video game. In fact, a lot of Star Wars shows Dave Filoni was involved with feel like video games, like The Bad Batch. If J.J. Abrams' stupid gimmick is the mystery box, Dave Filoni's stupid gimmick is pointless video game side quests. This problem persists more in The Bad Batch, but holy shit, look at how much crap there is. The Mandalorian probably would have been a lot better if there was more organic plot. Basically, in this episode, Mando escorts the child to where they find some off-world Jawas have taken apart Mando's ship. I mean, there is a part with Trandoshans and a tracker on the child, but that's mostly irrelevant. So Mando is annoyed and bloody livid, and so he attacks the Jawas and the Jawas knock him out with an ion blast. So basically, Mando with his ship taken apart goes to Cloud City guy, and they bargain with the Jawas for Mando's ship back. If I were Mando, I'd just kill a lot of them, but I guess the Jawas defeated him last time, so I guess that wouldn't do much. So in exchange for the Mando ship parts that the Jawas stole, he's forced to basically retrieve an egg from a mudhorn, whatever the hell that's supposed to be. Basically it's a Spanish bullfight, and I guess the whole part of the sequence is to show that the child can use the Force, but only to a limited degree. I want to talk about the child for a bit. I'm not opposed to the idea of the child, but there's a bunch of issues I have. First, the age. It was safe to assume that Yoda was physically 19 by human standards. So if the child is 50, then how old is he supposed to be exactly? Looking at him, it'd be safe to assume that he'd be less than 1 or 2, which makes it confusing because then Yoda would be significantly younger than what you think. He's probably 60 by human standards now. I guess it doesn't matter that much, but being 50 just brings up some questions regarding him and Yoda. Oh, so to be clear, the reason I'm calling him the child for now is because that's his given name until Season 2, Episode 6, very late into the series. There's also another issue I have with him that pops up later, but for now, the main issue I have is age and continuity. So what about his character? Well, he's probably the best damn marketable character Disney has come up with. BB-8 was a good idea marketably. Story-wise, he was just underwhelming and served as an R2-D2 ripoff. The Porgs were fucking horrible, as was everything else in The Last Jedi, and Babu Fuck was just a swear joke. So for them to come up with something that I'm surprised even Lucas didn't come up with at any point is refreshing. I've made it clear that Omega is so irritating. Well, the child actually works because he's quiet the whole series. His character comes from stuff like his silent interactions with Mando. The way it's pulled off is way more effective than Omega. I have said that Lucasfilm is really getting carried away with the success of The Mandalorian, that they just copy and paste the formula, which pandering is what Disney does best, god damn it. So point is, Mando gives Jawas the egg and they eat it. Jesus, you really could have just gone to Macca's and gotten a bacon and egg McMuffin, or whatever the Star Wars equivalent is. And in a sequence that mirrors the building house shit from Red Dead Redemption 2, they rebuild the ship. And when they're done, Mando offers Cloud City Guy to come with him as an assistant on his ship. The dude declines and they part ways. And that's the end of episode 2. So this episode disappoints as it stops the momentum of the story to waste both the characters and the audience's time, as this episode is comparable to a hindrance in a video game. There really wasn't that much to say. The desert backdrop had been in 6 movies up until that point. But not all hope is lost. We still have 6 more episodes to go through. So this is where the story gets back on track from that diversion. Mando delivers the child to the Empire, and they pay him what they owe him. Simple enough, but Mando, who's gotten curious at this point, and grown a little bit of something with the child, asks what they plan to do with him. The character known as the Client just tells Mando to forget about it. Now, I don't know how big of a trope this is. Insufficient information is always enough for something to go wrong in a story. We all know where this is going to go, that Mando is going to go back for the child, but I think it would help if the Empire at least lied to him about what they were going to do with the child. On the other hand, I like the Empire's very shady nature. It does give the impression that something big is happening. So Mando collects his payment, the Beskar armor, and the questions some might have about the Mandalorian are fixed. Mando takes the armor to the armorer. Yeah, pretty generic name. I should have said that earlier. And there's some lines that establishes what the Mandalorians are exactly. They are a warrior culture, and why Beskar is so valuable. And also we get information that the Mandalorians hate the Empire for purging them during their reign. This would have been nice to know in the first episode, but better late than never. So anyways, he goes back to the Bounty Hunters Guild, and Greef Karga has a new job for him, which is disregarded when Mando decides to go to the Imperial outpost and kill all the stormtroopers and retrieve the child. He meets an Imperial scientist who wears glasses. It's a weird design choice because we don't really ever see characters with glasses. But I guess we had to see it at some point, I guess. The Imperial scientist pleads for his life, saying that the only reason the child is still alive is because of him. and Mando lets him live. Keep in mind, a lot of these characters return in different episodes, and the same is true for the Imperial Scientist. The action here is really good. Bravo. If only it could be applied to the sequel trilogy. Mando takes the child, and Greef Karga and a bunch of other bounty hunters. Greef Karga is not exactly who I expected to confront Mando. It could have been the client, but I guess Greef Karga cares about when bounties are interfered with, or whatever, I don't know. I didn't quite catch on why he's suddenly hostile with Mando. So anyways, a battle ensues because Mando doesn't feel like giving up the child, and like a cover shooter, he hides behind some crates and other Mandalorians show up, and it's bloody awesome. If there's one thing they get right, it's the action. And I think it's really cool when Mando shoots someone with his rifle, and they disintegrate. So eventually this fight leads to Mando escaping with the child, but Greef doesn't die because he had Beskar right where he was shot. I really hate that trope, that Mando happened to think he killed Greef, but didn't because of a convenient bullet blocker. So this episode was easily the best one yet. Good action, improved writing, better pacing, and not an ounce of filler. And it fixes problems from previous episodes. Although it still does feel like a video game, I'm not gonna lie. But it's a mile ahead of the first two episodes. And Mando having a compassionate side is good for setting him up as a protagonist and an action hero. Good job whoever made this. Okay, I haven't had any trouble expressing my thoughts on the previous episodes, but this time, with the introduction of a character played by a blacklisted actress, this is going to be tough to review more than the previous 3 episodes. So this episode has a different setting to the first 3. It takes place on a planet with sparsely populated villages. At the start, we get a scene of a village being attacked by raiders. If only Preston Garvey was in Star Wars. Then cue the intro, and we see Mando land someone on the swamp planet, and goes to a local cantina to hide from the Bounty Hunters Guild. There, he meets Cara Dune. Now, I watched this show after the actress was blacklisted, so it was fresh off of my mind hearing the news. But this is a review of the show, so Cara Dune is a character I don't like. Writing-wise, the character is so bland, and there's not much substance to the character. Plus, her costume is bloody awful. She also feels like that political forced diversity crap that Hollywood was going through around the time. This, for the millionth time, is an issue I have said over and over again, but the characters and the designs are so goddamn horrible or undesirable. Disney wants to sell toys with Star Wars, and there's no way I'm going to buy an action figure based on any of the Mandalorian characters, except for maybe the Mandalorian himself. So Mando and Cara Dune meet and talk and whatever, but then the real episode starts when 2 villagers approach Mando at night and ask him for protecting against the raiders. Of course, Mando at first declines because they don't have enough money, but he uses the tiny ounce of compassion he has to accept the job. And a lot of this episode is humanizing the Mandalorian and giving insight into his personality. Like, when he gets to the village, a woman asks him when was the last time he took his helmet in front of someone else. This stuff sort of reminds me of Vader, and how he hated being seen without his helmet. I guess there's certain characters who like to remain faceless though. So with the help of Cara Dune, they basically get the villagers to build defenses, and Mando uses weapons to defend themselves, so when the raiders come, they're in for a shock. But Mando goes to them first, sneaking into their camp and killing the lot of them. That's actually a good strategy. Mando is wearing Beskar armor, and every hit to that armor has kept him safe, alive, healthy, yada yada. There's an action sequence when the raiders take an AT-ST to the village to attack it. But Mando has set a trap, and he destroys it with wires and stuff. Pretty good. The tactics are way better than The Last Jedi. And must I say, The Last Jedi had buffoons confused for tacticians, and so the battles were hard to follow because you were constantly like, why did they do this? But a good or tolerable tactics are a requirement for a movie about war. So the episode ends with Mando deciding to leave the child with the villagers. But of course, Disney wouldn't risk toy sales. Nah, it turns out the child is being relentlessly hunted, with the bounty hunter about to kill him, but Cara Dune saves the day. Hooray! It's still better with the Bad Batch with Omega not deciding to go with Cutler Queen. Not a bad episode, let it slide. They could have done better though. They really should have called this episode Return to Tatooine, but I guess they wanted to name each episode the whatever. I guess they really limited themselves there. And isn't the gunslinger quite broad? Mando is a gunslinger too. Or he could easily pass as one, because this is the first episode where we go to Tatooine and follow the continuing adventures of Mando. So the episode starts by showing us why he's landing on Tatooine. His ship gets damaged by another bounty hunter, which dies shortly after pursuing Mando. So he looks out for repairs. He lands on Tatooine, where he meets a mechanic and those droids from the Phantom Menace, to remind us of what trilogy is better. So anyways, he leaves the child on the ship, which I suppose he doesn't have much more choice. It's either leave the child unsupervised or bring the child with him. So I have no issues here. Well, fortunately, the mechanic is friendly and takes care of the child in his absence. So Mando walks into a cantina, looking for work so that he can continue to live. And we meet Toro Calican, played by a nobody. I looked up the actor and he's basically been in nothing notable other than The Mandalorian. And I guess being in a Star Wars show is better than nothing, I guess. Lucky break, you got to be in Star Wars. Yippee for you. Point is, Toro tells him about a job from a bounty hunters guild. Toro wants some help taking in an assassin, Fennec Shand, and Mando basically tells him that if he goes after Fennec Shand, he'll be dead. D-E-A-D, dead as dead can be. So Toro, in an effort to convince the Mandalorian to help him, reveals that it's his first job and tells him that he can keep all the money. He just needs the prestige to join the Bounty Hunters Guild. So Mando accepts, and I guess he does try to trick Toro into giving him the tracker, but Toro destroys it, so Mando is basically stuck with him. With that being said, Toro gets the speeder bikes needed to travel across Tatooine, and during the travel to Fennec Shand, we get this really iffy scene with the Sand People, where basically Mando trades one of Toro's pieces of equipment to pass through Sand People territory. And I feel really bad for the dude, especially as he tells the Mando that the equipment was brand new and it probably cost a bit. Mando doesn't care, he just wants to help him complete the bounty. I know what the bigger problem is, but I'll talk about it when I make the Season 2 review, alright? Mando himself is a bit of a douchey character. You might be telling me that he's a bounty hunter, duh. But just look to Knights of the Old Republic 2 with the character of Mira. Very smug, but she isn't goddamn consumed by the work she does. I'm just saying, Mando doesn't have to be so cold. Mando isn't exactly protagonist material. He isn't an inspiration to anyone. And while his story can be compelling, I never got any connection to him most of the time. And it's shit like this that proves my point. So anyways, they get to Fennec Shand, and we get a better impression of her danger level than the Bad Batch episode 4. Since she was introduced in this episode, and not shoehorning her in like the Bad Batch, we actually get compelling drama when we see the sniper, very efficient, very dangerous. So with that being said, they have to wait all day until they can make their move. And this gives a better impression of her danger level than the Bad Batch, where it was essentially 4 against 1 and she lost unsurprisingly. Well, Mando comes up with a plan to capture Fennec Shand by causing a distraction. The plan works and they have Fennec Shand in cuffs. No complaints here, but since one of the speeders was destroyed in the process, Mando has to get a do-back so they can travel with Fennec Shand in custody. So Mando tells Toro to wait, and so Fennec Shand tries to convince Toro to let her free, and that taking out the Mandalorian would be worth much more than her bounty. Toro takes this advice to heart, and then kills Fennec Shand. So with that being said, Mando finds Fennec Shand dead. He goes back to the docking port where he landed to confront Toro. Toro tries to take out Mando, but he is killed. You know, I kind of half sympathize with Toro's desire to become a legend. The dude was way in over his head, but he was probably pissed at Mando for letting the Stand People take his property. I mean, I knew he was gonna die at this point, but I don't see the decision as inconsistent with Toro's character. Just because a character makes a stupid decision doesn't mean it ruins the story. Like Star-Lord when he decided to punch Thanos. That was a believable stupid decision. Well, that's that. Mando uses Toro's money to pay the mechanic and then the episode ends. I guess thinking about it, well, I can rate this as a good episode, and I'm intrigued on what's gonna happen next. Well, this is a really action-oriented episode. So I may not have much to say about it. The episode is basically the Mandalorian taking a job from one of his contacts, Ranzar Malk, who has a job for him. Get his buddy Quinn out of Republic custody. Basically, Quinn has been arrested and is on a maximum level prison transport, probably for something highly illegal. I can only imagine what. Joining Mando is Migs Mayfield, a Twi'lek named Xian, I probably butchered that name, who is the sister of the rescue target, a droid, and Mr. Krabs. It's the same actor in case you didn't know. These shady characters give a bad first impression. I really dislike these characters. They look like antagonists, which is what they eventually end up being. Not a lot happens in this episode plot-wise, other than the group betraying Mando, and Mando breaking out and defeating all of them but not killing them for some reason. I mean, Migs becomes relevant in the series later, which was just a bad Chekhov's gun, because why didn't Mando kill him? This episode is just a waste of time. It doesn't really do anything. This is by far the worst episode of the season as it just pads out the show. Next! Okay, this is where shit hits the fan. Mando gets a message from Greef Karga, revealing that he survives, and he needs his help because the client has the city where the bounty hunters reside, under Imperial Remnant control, and Mando decides to take up the offer, but decides he needs help. And oh, that's why we had these questionable episodes with guest appearances. It's so Mando would go back to recruit them. I still don't like Cara Dune though. Next, Mando goes to the planet from the first episode to pick up the Cloud City guy. And I actually enjoyed Cloud City guy's character a lot more than the first 2 episodes. I was sort of just okay with him in the first 2 episodes, but here, I think he gets way more development and characterization. And to show us that the droid IG-11 wasn't just there to be a rip-off toy seller, we have the droid reprogrammed and helping our main characters. We get a bit of backstory on Cloud City guy reactivating and retraining IG-11, and Mando actually manages to convince the dude to help him with the child and his situation and whatnot. So on the trip over, Mando and Cara Dune arm wrestle, and the child uses the Force to choke Cara Dune. If only Cara Dune would just die because I don't like her character. And this scene is shown to further give the characters clues on who the child is exactly. Of course, by now we've guessed that the child has something to do with the Jedi. So with that being said, Mando lands the ship outside of the Empire's detection, right where Greef Karga told him to meet. Greef talks about how Mando will use the child as bait to get close to the Imperial client and kill him. The episode does really give the impression that something isn't right here. So I like the sense of cautiousness. So anyways, they take a hike all the way until nightfall, until some flying reptiles attack and heavily wound Greef Karga, and it seems Greef is done for until the child uses Force Heal. I've complained about this in the Rise of Skywalker review, and it also warrants a tangent here. Force Heal in Star Wars is very questionable, especially here where it can reverse any oncoming death dictated by the writing. I really refuse to believe that with the limited amount of Force users in the galaxy after the prequels, that Force Heal, or an ability like it, came into being known. If I get around to talking about each individual season of the Clone Wars, I will definitely flip my shit because of a certain character using that power when he shouldn't know how. But I really don't accept Force Heal unless it's in a video game because, well, Force Heal is a convenient gameplay mechanic to avoid the game getting too hard. So the next day, they arrive at the city and Greef Karga shoots his assistant bounty hunters and reveals that he originally planned to kill Mando and take in the child, but after the child healed him, he couldn't go through with it. So Greef Karga actually has second thoughts. Good to know. With that being said, it's time for a new plan. Karga will bring in Mando as a fake prisoner along with the child, or at least the hovering thing that actually holds the child, and they can use that to fulfill the original plan he told Mando. So they act out the plan to get to the client, with Cloud City Guy taking the child back to the ship and locking it tight. So Greef Karga brings in Mando, and I'm surprised the ruse wasn't found out because they keep whispering to each other and no one hears them. So the guard lets them through, and it turns out there's more stormtroopers than what Greef Karga describes. They get to the client, and they slowly plan to ambush them, and the client contacts his superior. one Moff Gideon. But then some laser minigun shoots through the window, killing everyone in the room except for the good guys. The villain kills his own men cliche. I fucking hate you. So we get the reveal of the big bad of the entire series, Moff Gideon, with Death Troopers from Rogue One and Stormtroopers surrounding the area. Moff Gideon comes out, and well, cool but basic costume. But when he opened his mouth to speak, I was kind of amused. Of course that wore off really quickly, but this guy doesn't really have much of an imposing or intimidating voice. But on the upside, Mando tries contacting Cloud City Guy in a transmission, the Imperials intercept, and chase Cloud City Guy. And it's a really tense chase sequence, with the cliffhanger being the Imperials have taken the child and killed Cloud City Guy. And it actually got a little bit of emotion out of me, but not a lot. So it's better than nothing. Since episode 2 takes off where this episode left off, let's move on. But this was a good, but not great cliffhanger. Alright, so the transition between the end of episode 7 and the start of episode 8 is really jarring tone-wise. This show kinda wastes our time with stormtrooper banter. The 2 scout troopers sent to retrieve the child await orders. While the dialogue is kind of humorous, it's a complete disconnect with the last episode where, you know, the Cloud City guy died. Oh, so this goes on for a solid 3 to 4 minutes, and nothing happens until IG-11 retrieves the child by killing the stormtroopers. We also hear references to the villain kills his own men cliche thing again. Jesus, I was really annoyed by Empire Strikes Back doing that. It was so irritating, but now Disney have embraced it, and it causes me mental exhaustion. Just stop with that tired trope, okay, Disney? Well, that was probably the most notable of the intros in the series so far, but only because of the obnoxious padding. 1 minute is enough, but they really opt to waste our fucking time with this. So as I said, IG-11 retrieves the child and the episode starts. So the trio at the closed building, surrounded by Imperials, tries to find a way out of their situation. There's a tunnel in the sewers, and Moff Gideon announces their names personally. Cara Dune of Alderaan, Rebel Shock Trooper, Din Djarin, aka Mando himself, and Greef Karga. Mando immediately recognizes that it's Moff Gideon, a name he's heard before, and we get another flashback of Mando's family being killed during the Clone Wars, and that the Mandalorian's taking him in. He talks about how Moff Gideon was an ISB officer during the Mandalorian Purge or something. To be honest with you, I wasn't paying that much to the dialogue, so I was a bit confused when they were talking about Moff Gideon, but it all makes perfect sense with a rewatch. Moff Gideon was involved with a purge against Mandalore. But then I thought, wait, this Mandalore? How the hell could Moff Gideon do any more damage to the planet that's already been fucking glassed? Unless the damage he did was against the people living on the planet. I guess this is kind of like forgetting the characters' names. It's so damn easy. Well, with that confusion I had rectified with the second viewing. So IG-11 saves the day, going in guns blazing, and a lot of stormtroopers along the way, and we get this cool action sequence of all hell breaking loose. Eventually, Moff Gideon orders his remaining troopers to burn the building the group are held up in. So we get these incinerator troopers. Cool design, but they don't do much. Mando gets wounded, and demands the others go find the other Mandalorians with regards from him. And there's a scene where IG-11 tries to heal Mando, but he refuses to let him take his helmet off, because no one will ever see him without his helmet. But IG-11 clarifies that a droid is not a living thing. So we get a glimpse of him and, well, that's Din Djarin for you people. He's not quite what I expected. He doesn't look much like a protagonist. The facial hair doesn't help. Like, Tamara Morrison was the perfect face for Jango, the clones, and Boba Fett. Pedro Pascal is sort of, well, okay, I guess. I guess I shouldn't judge a character based on how they look, but the character really needs the helmet on, because he doesn't intimidate me at all without it. Well, Mando's healed up, and he catches others in the sewers, and they come across the Mandalorian underground base, where only the armorer survived, and she tells Mando the Empire have basically attacked them. And to set up Season 2, she tells Mando that the child is probably part of the Jedi Order, and so he must find a living Jedi, which shouldn't be too hard. I'm pretty sure Luke Skywalker would have set up a new Jedi Academy by now. Or not. I don't really know why the new Jedi Order isn't a notable thing like it is in Legends. Also, Mando finally gets a jetpack, With that being said, IG-11 blows itself up in front of other stormtroopers, and Mando uses his jetpack to arm explosives on Moff Gideon's fighter, causing it to crash. They wrap up Season 1 with Mando now looking for a Jedi to take the child, with Cara Dune and Karga staying on the planet to rebuild and whatnot. Then we've got a final scene revealing Moff Gideon survived the crash, and that he possesses the Darksaber. Well, that's interesting. Cue the credits. So that's The Mandalorian Season 1. This show is totally overrated, but I didn't say it's bad. Season 1 only really has like one bad episode. I disliked episode 6 the most and enjoyed episode 3 the most. The story doesn't really pick up around the middle. 3 of the episodes are sort of just like side quests or setting up for main events. Now, my additional thoughts. I didn't talk much about the acting or the music. I'd say the acting is fine. Pedro Pascal is sort of like the cold, emotionless guy, but it works for his character, I suppose. Carl Weathers and the Breaking Bad guy seem a lot like stage performers. It sort of feels that they are doing this in front of an audience. I guess the actors are trying to be cool to promote toy sales, or just feel like stage announcers or something. The music works for the tone of the show, but it's nothing like the John Williams score. It has a Western aesthetic, but aside from the main theme, I barely notice any of it. I was off-put a tad bit by the score being so different from John Williams. A little familiarity would have helped, you know. Despite my concerns, it doesn't actually have any problems with the lighting. It's darker, but I can perfectly see what's going on this time. I guess the failure of Solo taught them where they screwed up there. The Mandalorian is probably a 7.5 out of 10 show. It's way overrated, but it doesn't deserve any scorn either. Not a bad season, let it slide. But I have a lot of issues with the show's second season. But that's another story. I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories about mystery boxes?